Welcome to Beyond the Powerline Road. Today I want to sort of just give a lesson about somewhat about evolution and mutations. And what happened is the reason I'm going to do this is I was trying to come up with a topic for what I was going to preach on Sunday, and I was struggling. So I was asking my daughters and my wife, and one of my daughters says, "Well, do your eye thing." Now, the eye thing is something that I tend to bring up and discuss every time someone comes up with mutations that don't seem to be realistic, because the eye is such an amazing sense organ. And so that's kind of what I'm going to do. Today I'm going to do the eye thing, if you will. But I want to start out with Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 9. What profit has a worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given tasks to which the Son of Men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in his time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of his labor. It is a gift of God. So what this states is that when we were born, and we're born with a soul, we are given in our hearts the concept of eternity, and we can kind of think about it to some extent, and we understand that yesterday was there, day before was there, today is here, we're hoping tomorrow is there. We see a perpetuation of time moving forward, and so it is not a real stretch of the imagination for an individual to think of the concept of eternity, at least in the future. I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination for anyone to think that, oh, hey, we can live forever. I do think it's a stretch of the imagination for individuals to think of eternity in the past, and that is the one which we really, truly struggle with. And so we are given something to rejoice about. We're given the fact that we can eat and drink, and we're given the fact that we can labor and we can enjoy the fruits of our labor, and that itself is a gift of God. I know as individuals we want to find things out. We want to know what went on, but we do not have the mind of God. And so there are certain things where we try to make extrapolations, interpolations. We are fooling ourselves. So if we go to Genesis 1:1, it says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." And that should truly be enough for us to understand that. And we will try our best sometimes to come up with something different. So he made, back to my previous verse, it says he had made everything beautiful in its time. In its time, he made everything beautiful. Also, he put eternity in our hearts, except that no one can find out the work of God, that the work of God does from the beginning of time. So what does mankind do? Mankind comes up with all sorts of theories and extrapolations to try to figure out what happened at the beginning of time. Instead of accepting the fact that God made the heavens and the earth, he comes up with all sorts of nonsense, including the Big Bang. The Big Bang is what I'm not necessarily what I'm going to talk on, but I think it's important to roll in here to mention it a little bit. The theory of the Big Bang is that we are a product of space dust, that there was a singularity where space and time were stuck together. It had infinite density and infinite temperature. Singularity was light years in length, and the laws of physics don't work with it at all, and we are to believe that we are the three-dimensional remnant of a greater multi-dimensional explosion. If memory serves me correctly, it's supposed to be an 11-dimensional explosion, and we are the three-dimensional remnants. Now, just to kind of put this in perspective, One dimension would be something like a line. 2 dimensions would be the surface of a piece of paper. 3 dimensions are what we are. We are length, width, and depth. Time is sometimes considered a dimension if we think of our length, width, and depth traveling through time, but that's not really a scientific concept because time is something that is sort of just keeps on going regardless, and we don't wind up changing it. So when we think about this Big Bang, if we are to believe it, we have to have a pretty good amount of faith. I had a student about 10 years ago, probably 9 years ago, and he went on to get his doctoral degree in physics, but he was an atheist when I had him, and I don't know if he's an atheist still. But we were talking about the Big Bang, and we were talking about God one time in my class. It was just him and I, and I'm not certain where everybody else was. I think he was my aide during my conference period. And I proceeded to tell him that it takes as much faith to believe in the Big Bang as it does in God. And I think if you actually were to go and encounter what the Big Bang entails, I think you would find the same thing. Now, there's a PhD called Professor Matt Strausler that made a statement that I want to quote. He says, "How could we possibly know what happened at the very beginning of the universe? No experiment can yet probe such an early time, and none of the available equations are powerful enough or usable enough to allow us to come to a clear and unique conclusion." I think Matt Strausser had a good idea. And so what does mankind do? They continue to develop theories to fill in the broken holes where things don't work. They contrive some sort of time intervals to be able to push their godless agenda. And if you think about it, if the Big Bang were to occur, then sure enough, it would have to take billions and billions and billions of years for any sort of probability for anything to come together, because the accretion theory, which are particles flying independently in space, are supposed to gravitationally be attracted to one another as they run into each other, bounce off, and after an experience of exhaustion, they finally stick together. The accretion theory has been disproven many, many times, but people think the accretion theory is what causes the suns to form, the planets to form, all that sort of stuff. And if so, yeah, you'd need a long period of time. The Earth, if you think about the Earth and its age, and you do not believe that it's 6,000 or 7,000 years old, and you're trying to justify what is going on with the Earth as having fully developed, yeah, you need to add in a whole bunch of years, and that's kind of what happens. So there are some things that I do want to kind of mention, and that is the Bible between Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. There was a group of individuals that so wanted to figure out how to put in the Big Bang and a geological time era that they came up with the gap theory that says that there were billions of years between Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. And yet, if you go to Exodus 20, verse 11, Moses said God created everything in 6 days. When God is talking to humans, he talks to humans in terms and years that humans can understand. If God is talking about the future, or if there's a prophet trying to do something prophetically, then sometimes numbers have a different meaning. Concept of 1,000 means a very long time, for example. Okay? There's also the problem with, if the solar system is as old as it is, if the Earth is 4.3 billion years old, and if all this age occurred, there would no longer be comets. Comets would have ceased to exist billions of years ago if this were the case, because comets, as they're flying through space, lose mass and debris, and they are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Halley's Comet, for example, is predicted to have only 39 additional loops around our solar system And that is a major extrapolation. It may be far less than that. And it takes every 72 years, Halley's Comet goes around. So, 39 times 72 is not billions. And so what happens? Someone had to come up with a concept for a comet making device in the solar system. And sure enough, a scientist came up with the concept of an Oort cloud. The Oort cloud is a cloud that we can't see, that we have yet to see with the Hubble telescope, but it is a comet manufacturing cloud out there in the deep recesses of space. Oh, yes, it makes comets so that the Big Bang Theory isn't thrown out totally because of the fact that they're still comets. There's another issue, and that is that the angular momentum deals with spin. If you think of an ice skater, and an ice skater has their hands outstretched and they're spinning around slowly, and they bring their hands in closely and they spin faster and faster and faster. What happens is all parts of that ice skater are traveling with the same angular momentum, which is basically same spin. If the Earth and Mars and Mercury and Jupiter and you name the planets were all thrown out by the sun, they all would have all have the same angular momentum because there's not friction to stop it. So our angular momenta of all the planets should be the same as the sun, but it is not, and it has never been. And so scientists try to come up with the idea of solar winds that have affected adversely the angular momentum of the sun. The interesting thing about it is every solar system that scientists have found where there is a sun-centered solar system, the angular momentum of the sun differs from the angular momentum of the planets, and the planets don't have the same angular momentum either. So what happens is time is one of those things that people have a hard concept that the Earth is just merely 6,000 years old. So they say that, in order for us to crawl out of the ocean, in order for us to develop to be a primate, in order for us to become a human being, oh, by golly, it takes a lot of time. And you know what? It would take a whole lot of time. So I want to talk about one aspect of evolution that absolutely, if it were a macroevolution concept, would make absolutely no sense, and that is the eye. So the eye is one of my greatest reasonings against macroevolution. Now, is there evolution? Yes, there is. Is there mutations? Yes, they are. Yes, there are. And mutations in evolution, when I'm speaking of them, is within a species, and it does not get out of the species. So, for example, COVID-19. COVID-19 is a RNA virus. That COVID-19 is going to wind up mutating many times. But you know what? At the end of the day, it's still COVID-19, just like the common cold. Common cold has changed and mutated throughout the years of my life. It has mutated I don't know how many times, and yet it's still the common cold. There was a study that I like to refer to, and it happens to deal with the Japanese islands and how nutrition affected the changes of the Japanese people. And it turned out that before World War I, if we looked at the general average brain size of the Japanese individual, their average brain size was about 800 cc's, which is 3/4 of a quart. Now, that brain size after World War II changed to about 1,100 cc's, 1,000 to 1,100, which is a quart, a little bit more than a quart and a few tablespoons, because of nutrition. The entire eating habits of the post-World War I Japanese people pre-World War I Japanese people changed to post-World War II eating habits, which were much similar to that of the world. So, yes, indeed, if you were to compare bone fragments or skull sizes of that particular set of individuals, you would find a significant difference. But guess what? At the end of the day, they are still humans. At the end of the day, we all are still humans, no matter how many mutations go on. And you go, well, how many mutations happen? There are at least 100,000 mutations that occur in our body every day. And we have a process, because mutations are primarily bad. We have a process that stops those mutations from occurring. So what happens is our body goes through a process of killing off the cells that have mutated. And of course, most of the mutations are indeed truly bad. Now, some, if we use diet and stuff like that to cause a change in body shape and body size, hey, we can think of those mutations as positive, or we can think of that as a form of evolution because of nutrition. But I want to talk about the eye. The eye hasn't changed in years and years and years. What happens with the eye is you have all sorts of wonderful parts on it. You have the cornea, you have the iris, you have the lens, you have the vitreous fluid in it, you have the retina, you have the optic nerve, you have all these wonderful pieces of the eyes. And in the professor of head department of pathology in government medical college by the name of Harsh Mohan. The statement is, the lens is a biconvex mass of laminated transparent tissue with elastic capsule. And you sit there and you think about it and you go, what in the world are you talking about, Mr. Zwarka? Well, here's what's going on. The lens is kind of like an onion. It is layered and layered and layered, and in the process of being layered, the really cool part about it is it stays transparent. So it becomes layered because of the fact that it has to be convex, because only real images can be projected onto a screen, so the lens has to be poochier out in the middle and narrower on the ends, and it also has to be able to move and adjust as we squint our eyes to refocus on things. So the lens winds up being layers of onion, if you will, that are very transparent, that allows light to enter, allows light to refract through it, and form an image on the retina at the back of the eye. It is elastic, and with muscular movement, the lens can change shape and focus distance in order to allow an image to project onto the screen in the back of our eyes properly. And here's the cool part about it. That image on the back of our screen, on the screen of our eye, is a physical image there, but we have photoreceptors and we have nerve cells that primarily digitize it, sends it through the optic nerve to the brain. The brain sorts it out, flips it right side up because it's upside down on our retina, flips it right side up, and tells us what we are looking at. Now, there was a famous scientist that said this about the eye because the eye is so spectacular. To suppose that the eye, with all of its immutable contrivances for adjusting the focus of different distances, for emitting different amount of light, and for correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. So basically, the scientist said that for the eye to have been formed by natural selection is absurd in the highest degree. Who is this famous scientist, you may ask? Charles Darwin. Now, the oldest eye in fossil records is that of a trilobite. And it is a very complex, faceted, compound eye with lenses made of calcite. The number of lenses in the trilobite may be as many as 15,000 lenses per eye. Very, very complex piece of information, sensing factor on the trilobite's body. The age of the fossils that yield these complex eyes if we were to use geological time, would be 540 million years ago. So in an evolutionary scheme of things, the eye was absolutely one of the first things that developed. So it occurred way, way down on the geologic time scale. Now, think about this. How can an animal, a creature, crawl out of the primordial ooze, wind up sitting there and going, wow, I need a photoreceptor. I need to be able to feel that sunlight. Oh, but not feel that sunlight, but realize that there are colors in that sunlight. And if there are colors in that sunlight, somehow it has to be digitized. And somehow it has to be able to be interpreted as a object. So if we ignore that the retina has photoreceptors that are necessary in the back of our eye to digitize an image into electrical impulses, if we ignore that our brain must be coded to interpret the electrical impulses into colors and structures, if we ignore that the cornea contributes to the refraction of light and keeps foreign objects out to protect the eye, and let us also ignore the iris, which controls the circular openings called the pupil. Its function is to control the amount of light that goes in and out. If we were to ignore all that, we can even ignore the vitreous humor, which is the jelly-like substance, but it is also transparent and allows light to pass through. Now think about vitreous humor. It is all within our eye, but if you think of our skin, it only takes 3 layers of skin so that we can't see the muscle and bone behind it. But this vitreous humor, as far as the lenses, are all transparent materials made by our body. All must necessarily work together for us to see. Still, some think that a one-celled creature mutated into being a seeing land creature. How absurd is that? Now, there are 2 basic thoughts of how the eye should be formed through mutation. The first basic thought is the eye was a product of a single mutation called the hopeful monster. All at once, in some freak occurrence of nature, the seeing eye suddenly appeared with lenses and retina and cornea and vitreous humor and the ability to be able to digitize a physical image on the back of our eye and convert it to where the animal or the creature can see what's going on. Man, that is just wonderful, wonderful parts for a fiction story. Second, that all the mutations, and then now the second one is that, there's a bunch of mutations, but guess what? They happen to occur by chance all at once. Now we understand to some extent why these people that come up with a 4.2 or 4.3 billion year old Earth need that time. Because the probability of anything happening like this is absolutely astoundingly not in favor of it. So what happens is if you add enough time, then you can say, well, there's this slight probability that this may happen. Yeah, let's just add a few more billion years and maybe we can actually come up with something that might be a little bit more relevant. So back to the freak of nature. This freak of nature would be able to see and differentiate colors. This freak of nature would be able to interpret between depth and movement. This freak of nature would be able to distinguish aspects of reality. It would be able to look at and see depth. It would know that, the clouds are further away than the hillside, which are further away than maybe the flowers up front. It would also be able to see color. So that means it would have rods and cones in it. All right. Now, although there are many different eyes, there's no direct evidence that exists to support the evolution of the eye. In fact, there is evidence that contradicts the evolution of the eye. For example, the number of myelinated fibers in the optic nerve does not correlate with the so-called evolutionary development of species. A pigeon has almost as many optic fibers as the human. Many birds, such as eagles and hawks, have excellent vision, but they have half as many fibers as a pig. Primates have only 2 cone photoreceptors. They have blue and green, but birds have a total of 6 pigments. So birds can see better, but on the evolutionary scale, aren't birds supposed to be more primitive than pigs? Or more primitive than primates? So, which one has mankind declared having evolved more? Well, obviously, mankind. The atheistic mankind has said that the primates are more evolved than the birds. What's interesting about some of the birds is they can see ultraviolet light. Humans can't. So does that mean that the birds are more evolved than us? Because they can see different colors of light, and we cannot. Their photoreceptors are better than ours. Now, there is nothing particular in the Bible that says that evolution is wrong. Okay, we understand that. We understand that God created everything, and by definition, that should be enough. But what happens is a lot of these people still believe that evolution is the way things have occurred. And if we look in Matthew 13:15, we can kind of get a sense of where these people are coming from. It says, "For this people's heart are waxed gloss, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and they should understand with their hearts." My first reference was about how God put the concept of eternity in our hearts. And we should come to an understanding that God is in total control. And we should come to that understanding with our hearts. And if we come to the understanding of that with our hearts, it is not a stretch of the imagination that the world was formed, that the universe was formed in 6 days. And so if we continue on, 1 Corinthians 2 verses 9, "But it is written, the eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor have entered into the heart of man the thing which God has prepared for those that love him." We cannot fully understand God's will, or the omnipresence and the omniscience of God. But God has revealed them to us through his Spirit, for the Spirit searches all things, yes, the deep things of God. For what man knows the things of man except the spirit of the man which is in him? Even so, no one knows the things of God except the Spirit of God. No one knows the things of God except for the Spirit of God. John 3:36, "He that believeth on the Son has everlasting life, and he that believeth not on the Son has not seen life, but the wrath of God abideth in him." We do not want to be in the situation where we do not want to believe God. There was a concept that I saw on Facebook, and it was a very interesting one, and it's one that I've always subscribed to, but it was actually written down on Facebook, and it said something like this. For those who do not believe in God can behave pretty much, or act as nice and as pleasant and as loving as those who do believe in God. The difference is they have nothing to look forward to when they die. Those that believe in God and believe that God created everything and believe in the plan of salvation, they have something to hope for when they die. So we do not want to have the wrath of God on us. And in Revelation 1:7, it said, "Behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him." So, listeners, think what you will, but I do believe that if you look at what the eye has to offer, you can see that macroevolution, that is evolution from species to species, is absolutely impossible. And if you think about the changes of one species, how they've adapted or mutated or anything like that, you will notice that microevolution does exist, and it is something that occurs as species evolve. And when I'm saying species evolve, I'm using the word species in here. I'm not saying interspecies or exospecies. I'm saying as humans change, oh, they're still humans. 46 chromosomes, 2 legs, 2 arms, face, 2 eyes, 2 ears. That will never change. Might they get taller? Yep. Might they live a little bit longer? Yep. Might they become smarter? Oh, we hope so. Have a great day. Bye-bye.